Hi guys, hope everyone's doing well. I'm here to talk about the chapter on semantics, LF6 chapter. I thought the conversations we all had this morning were pretty interesting. I definitely learned a lot about semantics and kind of the actual meaning of semantics, although it implies meaning. I thought it was pretty cool how we talked about the sense, reference, and the referent, and how like certain words can have a sense and a reference, but not necessarily a referent. For example, I'm just going to use unicorn since I talked about that, but it's kind of interesting to me that you can still have an image in your mind of what that word might be, but since it's not maybe a real object, it wouldn't have a referent, which would make sense. And I also thought it was interesting how that can change depending on the person. So we kind of talked about how, like, if that's something that is associated with that person in that person's life, or is something that they've maybe seen but someone else hasn't, then they might consider it to have a reference, like a stuffed animal that they know of, or a figure that they might think is real that isn't real. So that was all kind of interesting to me. I know we also talked about the different styles of word senses, so the dictionary style definition, mental image definition, and then the usage-based definition. And I know after listening to the talk, the dictionaries talk, TED Talk, I found it really interesting to learn more about the usage-based definitions and how different meanings can be implied for a different word based on how they're used and how frequently they're used in language. She kind of discussed that words are put in the dictionary based on the analysis of how people use the words, how often they're using the words in language, and what words are appearing, what new words are appearing, and what words are kind of disappearing from the language, and what words are staying and sticking. So that was really cool for me to be able to relate that to the TED Talk. I also thought it was cool, and when they talk about the mental image definition of they use the example of mother. So for some of us, when we think of mother, well, most of us, we'd probably think of our own mother. But when you say Mother Teresa or an elephant's mother, or use a different example, you think of that particular example. So I think it's just crazy how our brains can work and how one word can change depending on what precedes it and what follows it. The synonymy and antonymy were pretty self-explanatory for me. I feel like I think of synonyms and I think of antonyms. So synonyms, obviously, words that mean the same thing. Antonyms, words that mean two totally opposite things. Kind of just a different way of looking at it. And then the gradable antonyms were interesting for me because you don't really think about those in-betweens, things that are kind of fall along a continuum, that have things that fall in between. So it's not necessarily black or white, but it's gray, so something kind of right in the middle. So that was kind of something that I found interesting and thought about a little bit more. I also think it's interesting when I think of the word semantics. I know we talked about this in the discussion, but I didn't really think about this until now. But in speech language pathology, we learn a lot about people who have had strokes and traumatic brain injuries, and these people often have aphasia. And with aphasia, they have these paraphasias, and there's different paraphasias. People can have phonemic paraphasias, and they can have semantic paraphasias. So that's kind of what I started to think about when we were talking about the different categories of that words fall into. So like poodle falls in the category of dogs, and there's these broader categories. So a semantic paraphasia that you might see in someone who's had a stroke might be that they use the word train for car. so they can't access those other semantic categories in order to retrieve words that were in their vocabulary before the accident. So that, I don't know, I was able to relate that a lot to the symphony of that. So I thought that was pretty cool. Hope you guys learned a lot as well. Have a great week. Thanks. Bye.